think enough people have joined, and now I'm going to pass it over to Jen and Sayantani for their session on translating business requirements in Einstein Analytics.
Yay!
Hello, everyone. I know it has been a long day, and we still have two more awesome presentations to go through. One is from Kelsey about Indeed, and the second one is about SQL. Who doesn't love SQL in Einstein Analytics?
We need it, right?
Yeah, we all need it. At one point of time, SQL is our life. And first of all, thank you, Ricky, Annie, Jody, for doing this, because we have been longing for an Einstein Analytics self data dreaming. So this is awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Keep that coffee rolling. All right, so there's plenty of room on the beach with me if anybody wants to join. We're going to be on the data beach today. How about that? To introduce myself, if you're not familiar with who I am, even though this session is not about me, it's about you. But Sayantani and I have very different levels of experience. I have worked with Salesforce for 20 years. Yeah, I'm an Goldilocks in the ecosystem. And I've always been an analytics admin, because admin used to be the catch-all for everything that you do. And now I work at Palo Alto Networks as a Einstein Analytics data architect. So I finally have hit my career dream of being a data architect. And then Sayantani, I don't have all that college, but you can tell them about it.
So we both are analytics champions, as some of you may know, and you have already heard some speakers who are also analytics champions. I work as a senior data scientist at Gobi. It's a commercial real estate data hosting bill management company. And I like sharing what I work on with everyone. So I do have my own blog post. It's medium.com/Einstein Analytics.
It's really good too.
Thanks. And all, as Jen said, I have a master's in urban science and informatics, which technically means I have worked with millions of rows of data when I was doing that. So, yeah.
Yeah, so for everybody here, I want to emphasize that I'm 100% self-taught. I actually went to art school back in the day, and Sayantani is very much degreed. So that everybody here, the only barrier to doing this is yourself.
Yep. Okay, so let's start off with a very small slide, which says information is the oil of 21st century and analytics is the combustion engine. We are all doing this because we love analytics and we love data. So we are on the right platform, on the right side of things. Table of contents, we are going to go through this and you'll see more pictures than write up on this. So let's see how that goes. Before Jen takes over the know-hows, so a technical know-how before we dive in what you need for data and everything. There are two things that are extremely important. One is a data model and what are your tools.
Data you need those two things to start any project.
Exactly. These are the two things you need to start any project. Data model, meaning the company you are working for or the project you're working for, what is the data model? Not the data model which you are going to create in Einstein Analytics with the data flows and recipes, but the data model in Salesforce, the data model they have when they are bringing in external data. What do they do? How do they do? And why they do it the way they do it? Why do they have Google BigQuery instead of Heroku? Why do they have MuleSoft? Why do they not use anything and just Salesforce? There are various questions you can ask and various types of things you can ask, and that is going to give you more perspective into what they're looking for and what they want to do. Similarly, for tools, it's like painting. It's what are the colors? What are the brushes? What are the canvases? It's, are you using Einstein Analytics? Are you using Tableau? Are you using Excel? Are you using Python? Are you using, do you want some specific colors on your dashboards? Do you want your data flow in a certain point of time? All types of questions that come in, anything that you want to paint with, it's analytics, right? Ultimately, you are doing some visualization. So it is like painting. Take it away, Jen.
If you can start off with those two things that Sayantani just showed you, you're already halfway there to your project. But a lot of times the blocker to getting your project started or completed are the people and the situations. And so part of the goal of this session that we're doing is I obviously have 20 years, right, of doing this. I've had a lot of situations with data come up, and how I handle them 20 years later is very different than how I handled them in the beginning. So I'm speaking from all my collective experience. If I could go back 20 years in the past and tell my old self a few things, this is what I would do. So hopefully this will save you some hardships here when you're working on projects and get you to the meat of it and get it done beautiful and quickly, and you can get on to the next one and have a career with it. So there's always two situations when you walk into any new project, whether you work for a company and they say, okay, we want you to do this, or you're a consultant and you meet a company for the first time. And the way that I like to say is you're either in an ocean of data and there is no island. I mean, there's like all this data, but you don't know where you stand with all of it. Or you're in the barren desert without an oasis to drink from, right? It's like there's no data, but you're expected to create this project. So for everybody there that can relate to these two slides, every situation you're first gonna have to assess, do I have an overabundance to work with, or do I not have what I need? And then you can apply Sayantani's slide before this to this. What are the tools and what is the data structure? And it's kind of funny when I think back, in my past, that I used to walk into projects and not ask those questions, right? Just be like, okay. So learn to do these things from the beginning and save yourself a lot of hard work at the end. Okay, you can go to the next one. All right, so the first question that you ask, and we're going to give you a little bit more details here, but the first question that you want to ask when you come in and you have project requirements is, does the data exist or does it not? Because a lot of times the people giving you the project will tell you that, oh, we have all this, right, for you to work with. And then you go in there and you're like, wow, no, I don't see that. And then once you figure out where the data is that you have to work with, which will take some investigation on your part, you have to decide whether the data is dirty or clean. So data isn't anything else than these two things, because it can't have hidden agendas, right? It can't change itself when you're not looking, right? So it's either there or not there, or dirty or clean. So after you get past the first part of figuring out what you have to work with, then you have to figure out these two. With the dirty or clean, sometimes you don't know if it's dirty because it's not your data you're working with, or you've never seen that data. And that's where the part of becoming a data detective comes into play. And that's the next slide. All right, this is a lot of words. I usually don't put a lot of words on the slide, but I put them on the slide so you can take them with you. But if I would have remembered to ask all of these questions at the beginning of every project I've had, like I said, I would have saved myself a lot of late nights trying to figure it out after you know something is missing. But these are questions that you want to ask ahead of time because they will eventually come up. And maybe you have one of those jobs where you're given a project and nobody watches, right? Like you're just told to do it, but you probably want to write this all down anyway, because at some point somebody will make you accountable for your work. And it might not be the day you finish it, but it might be down the road when users are using it, or when your client has to pay their bill on their project. So keep this list in mind. We won't go over all of these today, but keep this list in mind that you can have all these points down before you start your work and as you're doing your work, so you have it when it's over.
One thing I would like to add here with bullet point 4, which is production versus sandbox.
Yes.
Your sandbox can be outdated as opposed to production. Especially for Einstein Analytics, you can have your own private app and you can save your data sets in your private app. So if you're working there and you have the capacity to work in production, do that and save it in your private apps or apps that others don't have access to, so that you can still continue working with live data and not in sandbox, and then have a problem when you are actually using change sets to launch them in production.
Oh, we can have a whole nother session about sandboxes differing from production.
Yes. Trust us, we have done this, we have faced it, and that's why we like working in production as much as we can now. Okay, fact check your data request before starting.
This is how you start to be the detective.
This is being a data detective. So on the left-hand side, you're seeing native Salesforce, which uses a schema builder. If you don't know where schema builder is, go to Salesforce setup, and there you're going, and in the quick find box, start, not this one, but here in In Lightning, you'll find a quick find box. Just start typing in schema, and this is going to come up. You can select what fields, what objects you want, and this automatically shows you how it is related. It's an awesome tool. If you have not used it, please do. And this is one of the first things you should do when you start working with data flows, when you're asked to join various objects, and because this tells you what your keys are, and it tells you which object joins to what. So you are halfway already there with this. Then you have source data live in Einstein Analytics. This comes from the data sets and data flows. Once you do this, you have to rename your fields. Account ID.name doesn't mean anything to anyone. CD_months doesn't mean anything to anyone. So these should be human readable. These should never be API names or names that you know and nobody else understands. So always, always make these human readable.
Yeah, and the layman's version, oh, I'm so sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, I'll assume, but the layman's version of this is you have to know those objects because Salesforce is a database underneath, and you have to know your fields. And a lot of times your users or people who are giving you projects, they don't know API names. They'll say, I want this field, and it's their name that they know it as, not the name that you'll see in here. So a lot of times you want to do a little fact checking on that.
Yep. And a very important point, verify that an admin has given you access to see all Salesforce and EA data sources and details. So you need access to your profile to see the objects and fields. You also need access to analytics security user and analytics user, integration user. So all these three have to have access for you to see any of these fields and objects in the data flow. Once that's created, that is a different point, but for you to build it, you need access.
Yeah, we've never been on a project, right, where you go in there and it's like, I don't see that object.
Yep, exactly.
And somebody didn't give you the permission. If you're not the admin, right, you have to put in a ticket or wait for somebody else to do it. This is probably going to be, in my opinion, like I said, layman self-taught version of, becoming a data architect. The most important piece of information I'm going to give you in this entire slide. Well, yeah, handling people is really important too, but this will save you. So back in the day, I used to get upset and cry. I really did 20 years ago. I would cry when people didn't like my work or they were upset with me. And now that stuff just bounces right off of me. But it's because I've learned to make a list of considerations. And the reason you want to make a list of considerations, and this is, I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are some examples you can use it for, is it deflects any negatives onto a document rather than you. So if somebody is upset because they want their data flow to run every 10 minutes and it can't because it's so large, right? You can say, well, I put that on the list of considerations. Or, this field has no data in it and that person's convinced there's data in it. It's like, well, look at my document of considerations, right? And how do you want to address this? So try and not to take anything that people say that's negative personally and put it back on the system, the considerations, your capability, and the tools that have been given to you. I once was given a dev org to do my project and it had no data in it. And they wanted me to configure, Einstein Analytics the way they wanted, but there was no data in there, right? So is that my fault? Well, you don't want to antagonize the person who's telling you. So instead I said, well, I listed on the considerations that I'm going to need some data to work with here. So if you can see, that's kind of a nice way of avoiding conflict and getting your project done faster.
And something that you see on the right-hand side of this is you can torture the data as long as you want. And if you continue doing that, it is going to confess to what someone wants to see. So that is not data science. That is not what you ever want to do. You want to show people what the truth is, not what they want to see.
Exactly. Oh, fun, fun, fun. I know that we all know that EA has capabilities and nuances, right? And that's the beauty of working with Einstein Analytics, is that we all know that the capabilities are amazing, but then we also have to deal with some things that it doesn't do. Sayantani, do you want to take this slide here?
Sure. So data flows, dashboards, lenses. And of course, there is stories. We haven't put stories here because we are doing only EA part, not the ED part. So data flows and dashboards. In data flows, you can change and update native Salesforce data without ever touching the actual data. Say you want to change the name of a field. You can do it in a computer expression. You can change the name of a field and remove the name of the old field. Super easy. Or you want to say you have in opportunities, you have different steps and you want to name them 1, 2, 3, 4. You can do it without touching the Salesforce data. Just use a computer expression, change the names, and voila, you have your data there. You definitely don't want closed to come last and one to come second. So you need it in a specific order. Similarly, you can connect objects, you can connect external data sets by any ID. By ID, just remember that Salesforce by default gives you 15 digits and 18 digits. 15 digits is still most common, but Einstein Analytics uses 18 digits. Another point to add to that, when you're using Excel to look up, say you have downloaded a report in Salesforce, 2 reports, and now you want to do a lookup on them, please, please, please do not use 15 character Salesforce IDs because they are case sensitive and Excel is not great with case sensitivity until and unless you do a bunch of formula fields on them.
That would go on your considerations list.
Yes, please, please always use 18 digits when you're doing VLOOKUPs. If you're downloading data from Einstein Analytics, it is already 18 characters, so you don't have to worry about that. Next point, scrub and correct messy data. Yes, keep this limited, but scrub and correct messy data. I keep telling this in a lot of places. Chicago 311 data has Chicago written 100 ways. This was around 2 years ago. I have not gone into 311 data in the last 2 years. I have no idea how much more of a crap it is right now. But yes, there are 100 ways you can write Chicago. I had no idea. Create formula fields, counts, and case statements. Again, same thing. It's compute expressions, compute relatives. Of course, you can filter, append, flatten, update. You can do so many things in data flows. With data prep 3, you can do far more, and it's coming. Safe harbor, but coming. Dashboards and lenses, as we showed you, you can rename fields, you can visualize your data, you can do multiple charts, you can do multiple pages within the same dashboard. Those of you who joined Carl's session, he mentioned it, how pages are useful. It gives you an animation, not the way he did it, but using pages, you can do some animations. And last but not the least, which you are going to hear at, I think, 5, I don't remember the name. The last one you'll hear, which is SQL for advanced queries and interactions. By the way, bindings is now called interactions, in case someone is thinking, what is interactions?
Oh, I got to remember that. Yeah, and before I go, this is one of my favorite slides too. Before I go, on top of what Sayantani said, you know, presentation and attitude is everything. And so if somebody says, you know, oh, I'm so upset, I can't do this in the project you're doing, you know, I wanted this field, but there's no data in it. Try to bring up what it can do instead. So in, you know, your list of considerations, you have what it can't, but you want to say what it can do, because you want to say, well, yeah, you can't have that one, but you're getting a really awesome dashboard, you know, at the end. And if you're positive, then 9 times out of 10, the person you're dealing with is going to be positive too, because you're not all getting on the fear train, right? We're going to say like, well, there's just one thing. One thing is no big deal on a project, right? It's when you can't do it at all that it's a big problem. So this comes, all of these come from my personal experience. These are all situations I've been in. And I'm sure some of those that we can't hear right now are looking at these scenarios saying, I've so been there, right? And so it's, you're just doing your work, doing your thing. Half the time we wish people would just kind of leave us alone to do it. But instead what happens is, you know, people will take their junk out on us, right? And that junk isn't your junk, but it's part of the job, right? So I was one time in a meeting and an executive said, you're drowning me in data. Well, that's my job, you know? So drowning me in data usually just means like I don't understand what I'm seeing, or I'm seeing a lot for my brain to take in. Some people are visual, some people are literal. You really have to know your audience. And if you don't, you have to step into their shoes and be very empathetic. And that was a hard thing. In the beginning, I wanted to get mad at people for yelling at me like, that can't be right. Rep X is our best sales rep, you know, and the data is saying something different, you know, because their perception is different than what the data says. And so you learn to say, oh, they're not mad at me. they just don't understand what's happening. So if I step into their shoes, what would they need to know? And it's hard. I'm not going to lie. It's very hard sometimes to be empathetic with people who are angry at you, but I promise you, the more you do it, the easier that it gets. Don't fight a battle that's not yours, right? Data is data. It's not changing, right? It is what it is. You know, the other thing is they'll say, well, I see it in Salesforce. I already have a Salesforce report, you know, and they'll want to keep using that after you've done your project. You know, that even happens to us when we're doing native Salesforce. And this data is useless because the chart has pink. I really had that scenario happen. I had somebody want to throw an entire project out because of the Easter colors that came up on the bar chart. Of course, now we have a lot more control over the colors in Einstein Analytics. But, you know, if that person's paying you and they don't want to see pink, I'd find a way to get the pink off there and not be angry at them, right? So it's all about how you handle it, your attitude and your empathy. And sometimes I give people personality tests. If I have a situation that I can have people take a personality test, like 16 personalities, so that I know what I'm dealing with ahead of time. And I'm on the spectrum and I sometimes miss social cues. So that helps me even more because angry just sounds angry to me. It's hard sometimes to figure out they're not angry at me, they're angry at what they're seeing. And so if you learn how to deflect, you learn how to handle and calm people down, and you learn how to be empathetic, once again, it'll make your project and the rest of your career go a lot easier.
Okay, perception varies. Use check-ins and iterations. So as Jen has put it here, it's an excellent idea to schedule check-ins with the requester. I'm going to give you an example which happened to us, I think 2 weeks back. What happened was there was two different dashboards, one based on, say, let's take the example of buildings. One based on how the weather changes the rent of the buildings. Because if you are in a rental apartment in places like Chicago and New York, during winter, our rents go down, and during summer, our rents go up. So it's always the best idea to move during winter because then the rents are lower, and for the next 1 year, you save money. That's how it goes. But the same thing, now when we are trying to plot it based on a whole client and based on single properties, we don't get the same data. Why? Because weather for a whole property will vary from weather if you have it all over the US. One single property has one weather zone. All of US does not have one weather zone. So now it started changing. And that's when we realized, though the idea was great, that is not how the data should be working. And we scrapped the project. That no, this is not the right way of seeing the data. And we started from scratch again. So it happens. Don't get worried. That's why multiple check-ins before you finalize your final result is extremely important. And the next one, as you can see, is all blocks or jumbles or puzzles, whatever you want to call it. You can do this in multiple ways. You can do multiple iterations. You can figure out, you can do 10 iterations and then ask your client which of these best suits your need. So do them, and it'll be extremely easy for you. And don't finish this first and then look at other things, but continue checking ins.
Guys, a 5-minute warning.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. Well, here's your survival guide that we're going to leave you with here. And, you know, it speaks for itself here. This is about being empathetic, your attitude, and, you know, dealing with people in general. And if you follow all the words that I'm not going to go through on here, I promise you it will once again make your projects and your career go easy.
And you will stay calm. Okay, food for thought. This is how do you do it finally? You identify your data source. Then you
now we're getting to the technical. 5 minutes.
You do the data checks, which technically is your messy data, clean data. Then you create something, you create a data flow, you create a dashboard. Then you QA and validate it. Is what I wanted to see ultimately, is the data flow working right? And is the data flow joining to the right sources? All those things are QA. Finally, you ask, either you validate the data yourself or you ask a domain expert to validate your data. Ultimately, you release it. After release, You still need to keep doing this process because your source might change. Your data might become messy suddenly. You might need to recreate it because the way Einstein Analytics works or your data changes. So this web that you see on the left-hand side is basically all these dots. You're all joining it together for one single project, which can change. But yes.
Follow the circle of life here, and you can't go wrong. We have some extra. Yeah, I was going to say we have some extra slides there. We'll let everybody read after because we knew on time that we probably weren't going to be able to go over like all of this could take a day to sit down with somebody, but we made this quick resource list. It's not a heavy resource list, just some things to help you with.
Because you have heard all of these before. The one thing that I would emphasize here is color your dashboards. Einstein Analytics has come up with design templates and templates, use them. People resource, you heard this multiple times today. People resource is extremely important, who you work with, who you are working for. Extremely important. Jen pointed out the quick personality test for 16 personalities. Blogs by Ricky, videos by Pete, and there's way too many of them now. And all of them are different and all of them have varied use cases. And of course, you already heard all the books on dashboards dashboards and visualizations.
Exactly. Thank you. We should have more time.
Well, let's ask some questions. So one question that came in is, whose responsibility is poor data cleanup?
That's a question to ask. Or I'll just clean it. You know, I don't know about Sayantani, but I'll give you in my 20 years. I didn't used to ask, I used to just do it myself. And then that got me in some situations where I found out that maybe they didn't want that data cleaned for whatever reason, right? Or it was somebody else's job. So I would always verify before you do anything. But a lot of data people are independent, so it's hard to resist that urge to just do it yourself. And okay, I'm gonna step out of my box here real quick and say that sometimes they don't know who's going to clean their data, right? This happens, right? When you ask me like, oh, you know, so be prepared to propose solutions for cleaning the data, whether it's you, whether it's a tool, whether it's somebody in-house. Be prepared to give them the answer they should be giving you. I hope that helps.
Yeah.
It's hard when we don't get feedback from people. It's like I'm staring at my cell phone here.
And that looks like that was the only question. So thank you, Jen and Sayantani, for presenting.
Thank you to everybody who attended. We appreciate everybody who put this conference together and the moderators like you.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks, everyone.